This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. Politics takes center stage this week, and our panel shares their impressions of both the Democratic and Republican conventions. We'll also look at what we can expect when the legislature comes back to town next week, including Governor Cooper's budget proposals. Plus, we asked the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of which, our panel this week includes Brad Crone, communications consultant, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom, and Becki Gray, the vice president of the John Locke Foundation. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussions after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Let's begin the spin. Now that we've had the conventions from both political parties, we want our panel to give you their impressions of each. I'm going to ask each of you, and starting with Brad Crone, since the Democrats were first to hold their convention, give us your impressions of it. Brad?
Well, Tom, both parties tried to build a lot of energy, but the simple fact of having virtual conventions takes a lot of drama and a lot of oxygen out of the air. So both parties had a really difficult time in trying to build audiences and deliver the oomph that you want coming out of the conventions. There won't be a bounce for either Trump or Biden coming off the conventions.
Interesting. Chris Fitzsimon.
Oh, I thought the Democratic convention went a little smoother technologically. It also, of course, didn't violate the law like the Republicans did, using federal government, federal resources in violation of the Hatch Act. There was some, we hadn't heard Kamala Harris give a speech in quite a while. I think there was some suspense around that. And also the fact that John Kasich and other Republicans appeared. But I think Brad is right. Overall, I don't think either convention is going to have a dramatic impact on the polls.
John Hood, your impressions of the Democratic convention.
Well, I think the rhetorical purpose of the Democratic convention was to frame the election as a referendum on Donald Trump. I mean, there was some discussion about the background of Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris was reintroduced, as Chris said, but it was basically about Trump, about making it just a clear yes or no, do you like the way things are going right now? I think rhetorically that was well crafted, but I agree with Brad that the likely long-term political impact is nil.
And Becki, your impressions.
I thought that the Democratic convention was very controlled. It was, many of the speeches were recorded way before the convention even started. I thought that it was a very negative message. I thought it was a consistent message of everything that is wrong with America. I didn't get an uplifting impression of it at all. I also thought it was interesting that they relied real heavily on the old guard with the Obamas, with the Clintons, of course, Joe Biden, who has been in public service for close to 50 years. So to me, it was a very tired but a very controlled message that came out of that. I agree with my co-panelist. I don't think there's going to be a bump either way with this. And as Brad mentioned, doing this virtually and going online to do it certainly posed some challenges. And the way that both of the parties wanted to relay their message and the way that those messages play well, it was almost as if the Democrats were afraid to put their message in front of a live audience and a lot of people, where the Trump campaign and the Republican convention, you could see they were pushing further and further, pushing that line to get.
All right, let's get to the Republican
front.
convention next. Brad, start with that.
Well, I was interested watching Becki say that the Democrats were negative. Then it must have been fear and mongering and catastrophic end of times watching the Republican convention and all the concerns that they were putting out. My impression is this is you got to really ask yourself, when are the thinking Republicans going to step up and say, you know, having a monkey see, monkey do agenda that they passed as a forum for them to move forward, that basically we're not going to take any value statements. Whatever Trump tweets out is what we're going to endorse, should be very alarming to true brand conservatives and thinking Republicans in this country.
Chris Fitzsimon, the Republican convention.
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit. I was still startled that it's not a bigger deal that for the first time we had federal employees on the White House grounds with the Park Service and all that working in effect in a political campaign briefly. So that's number one. Number two, it sounded like President Trump is running as the outsider again. He's talking about what's going to happen in Joe Biden's America, and he's using video. Well, first of all, he's using video from Spain, which is a little weird, but he's also using video of what's happening in streets while he's president. So it doesn't work as well when you're the incumbent to criticize sort of the way things are. And finally, I think I agree with Brad about a little bit reacting to Becki's analysis to talk about the Democrats not running ideas. The Republicans literally have no party platform. They literally decided we don't have any policies. Whatever President Trump says is our policies. Trump was on every night. It was like watching North Korea or Fidel Castro, where we had the same person, everybody paying homage to the same person who got to speak every night, which I thought was very bizarre. But even with all those things, I don't think the convention changed anybody's minds, either one of them.
All right, John Hood, your reactions to the Republican convention.
You know, the American public is in a disappointed, disaffected, surly mood. Usually this would be bad for whoever's in power. So when the Democratic convention was held, this is a referendum on the current president. So what did Donald Trump and the Republicans do? As we've talked about, if y'all have already mentioned, what they decided to do was associate the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, with something that the public is unsettled or unhappy about, which is disorder in the streets, rising crime, attacks on American ideals. So that the idea here, the rhetorical purpose of the Republican convention was to take something the public doesn't like, and instead of having that attached to the incumbent, and Chris says this is a strange thing or a challenging argument to make, what they decided to do is attach it to a challenger and say, if Joe Biden is elected, these things will get a lot worse. If Donald Trump is reelected, he can make them better.
Becki, your reactions.
Well, just like there were two conventions, you know, it's almost as if we saw two Donald Trumps. You know, if you listen to the Democrats, he is the devil incarnate. If you listen to the Republican convention, he's the most caring, compassionate leader America has ever had. So, you know, there was a clear distinction between the two conventions, which reflects really the attitude of the country. You know, whether these conventions change anybody's mind, I mean, the voters whose minds need to be changed by one party or the other are those independent voters in the middle. I think that both conventions played to their base very well and shored that up. Just one other real quick point, Tom. One other thing that I saw from both conventions is sort of the emergence of women and the importance of women. Everything from the speeches of the potential Jill Biden and Melania Trump, you know, moving from sort of being an accessory to the campaign to really being a very vital partner in those campaigns and with their husbands. And so, you know, and the speeches and the lineup and all of that, that was something that really struck me.
One thing that I noted was that neither convention did exceedingly well in the ratings, but the ratings for the Republican convention dropped precipitously from the Democratic convention. Not trying to make an explanation for that, but it did happen. Brad, Charlotte really had hoped to get this convention and hoped it would be an economic stimulus for them. There were plans for all kinds of events scheduled around the 4 days, but a 4-day convention ended up being more like a 4-hour convention. How much of a bang, how much of a boost did Charlotte come out of this with?
Well, I don't think that it hurts Charlotte, the Queen City, to be in the national spotlight, even if it was just for 4 hours. They did an excellent job in 2012 of hosting the Democratic National Convention. I'm sure both parties will be looking at Charlotte moving forward simply because of the importance that North Carolina plays. The big question right now, Tom, is according to the Charlotte Observer, the city spent about $25 million preparing for the convention. How are they going to recoup that money, and will the RNC help pay the bill?
Yeah, that's a big question there. There was another convention in Charlotte this week that got practically no publicity whatsoever. It was the Convention on Founding Principles. And it had, among others, James Comey, Michael Steele, former RNC chairman, Christine Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey, Charlie Dent. Our own Bob Orr was part of that. Chris, did they have any impact whatsoever? Did anybody pay any attention to this? This was another Republican group against Trump.
Well, we're talking about it, so they had some impact. I mean, I don't think they got a lot of publicity, but there's still a long way to go before the election. It's interesting. Also, this past week, a lot of staff members for John McCain, a lot of staff members for Mitt Romney have come out. Senator Jeff Flake has come out encouraging people to former Republican Senator Jeff Flake from Arizona. I think you'll see a steady stream of Republicans. I mentioned you saw John Kasich speak at the Democratic convention. I think there clearly is a strategy for the Democrats and Republicans who are alarmed by Donald Trump, even if they're conservatives, to say this is not a typical Republican. We need to elect Joe Biden and then get back to arguing about policy instead of one person dictating everything by tweet and fiat.
I agree with whoever it was that said there were two different realities being expressed in these conventions, but there was one common thread throughout both of them, and that was Donald Trump. And we've said before, he is the common thread in this convention. Like him or not, it's all about Trump. We'll talk more about that next week when we look at the elections. But next Wednesday, the legislature convenes with a full plate of items to consider, including appropriating more CARES Act funds and working on a state budget. Now, Governor Cooper presented his budget proposals Wednesdays, and we want to look at them. The demands are immediate and large, and the decisions are important. Becki, Governor Cooper laid out his budget on Wednesday. We want to talk about them in more detail, but the first question is whether the legislature is even going to consider them. Typically, the legislature takes the governor's proposals, put them on a shelf, and then pretty much ignores them. Is that what's going to happen this year?
This is exactly what is going to happen this year, Tom, and really for good reason. The governor's budget is unrealistic. It is way too aggressive in its spending. Thinking of giving state employees, giving teachers $2,000 bonuses in these economic times. We are in such uncertain times. There was additional revenue that we did not expect, but that really is just an accounting thing.
We're going to get into some of the specifics later.
And yeah, the General Assembly is not going to consider this budget, nor should they. To consider going into $5 billion in debt at this time is just, in my view, it's fiscal mismanagement, it's fiscal malpractice to even propose these kind of things.
Brad, the legislature was hoping when they adjourned this spring, late this spring, they were hoping that by this time, we'd have a better handle on the economics of North Carolina, how much money they were going to have available. But because we postponed the personal income tax deadline to July 15th, has it settled down enough for them to be able to know how to put the budget together?
No, it hadn't, Tom, and that's a real big problem. Fluidity on cash flow is creating massive headaches as state budget leaders in the governor's office and the legislature are trying to count how much money they do have to spend. It is a huge issue, and I think Becki's absolutely correct. The budget proposal the governor put together is dead on arrival. The legislature sees it more as a campaign commitment or a campaign document than actually a spending map for state lawmakers.
Interesting. John, North Carolina got $3.5 billion from the Federal CARES Act. They allocated a fair amount of it in their earlier sessions. They now have, depending upon how it's interpreted, either $500 million or $900 million to be able to appropriate. That, by the way, is contingent on whether the federal government will give them more flexibility on money that they want to spend on transportation. But assuming that we've got the $500 million, what are the priorities for them?
Well, I think the priority should be twofold. Number one, immediate true COVID-related needs, personal protective equipment, lab equipment, supplies that we need to address the immediate actual pandemic itself. And then hopefully with some help from the federal government getting their act together, Congress getting its act together, the second priority ought to be to staunch the wounds in the budget. It's not to go into new initiatives. I mean, the governor includes issuing debt without a public vote to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on university buildings, claiming that it will advance the vaccine development process. This is a preposterous notion that's the reason why it's not being seriously considered at the General Assembly. But in fairness to the governor and the legislature, they need flexibility to use those COVID dollars from Washington, those relief dollars, to address the main thing that state government is affected by other than health, which is the huge budget deficits and the inability potentially to deliver basic services over the coming year.
Chris, one of the things that a lot of people are hopeful for is that this legislature will do something about our unemployment benefits in North Carolina. There is little argument about the fact that we have among the stingiest benefits in the nation. Governor Cooper has proposed we increase these benefits from a maximum of $350 a week for 12 weeks to $500 a week for 24 weeks, which, by the way, just sort of returns it back to where it was. The legislature has not shown a lot of appetite for doing so. Do you think there's any more now?
Well, I'm not sure if they have an appetite, but it's long overdue. It's embarrassing to have the least duration of, we tie, I think, with Florida as the most stingy state in America for unemployment benefits at a time when many people don't have a job to return to, or it's not safe to return to their job given the coronavirus. So at the very least, we should have some emergency plan to extend those benefits, both in terms of duration and amount, until we get to the end of this crisis. I think they should be extended. We shouldn't be the worst in the country at any time, but especially now under this emergency.
Becki, the $600 benefit that the federal government was giving to unemployed, on top of the state benefit, has gone away. Now, President Trump, by executive act, decreed $300 a week could come, which will come out of the emergency funds for FEMA, by the way, which is another issue. But nonetheless, North Carolina was approved to get these $300 a week funds from the federal government. Senator Tillis this past week said he thought the Senate was primed to pass legislation for $400 a week benefits. What do you know about that?
Well, not much more than what you've just described. What I do know is we ought not be waiting on Congress for this. And, these people are hurting now. As John alluded to, these additional funds that come in need to address the immediate needs that people have so that we can get things in place so that we can get people back to work and earning money. And so the unemployment benefits in question does not become as critical as it is right now. Where we get that money and where a North Carolina supplement may come from is something that I think is very important to pay attention to, and we may be looking at the General Assembly when they come back into session. Does that money come from COVID, some of the CARES money? What I hope they don't do is dip into the unemployment trust fund, as the governor has suggested.
Well,
We've finally gotten that.
We've got $3.8 billion in that fund.
Right.
Why should we not use it? That's what it's there for.
If we don't have to use it, we ought not use it. The money that's coming in from the federal government is designated for the COVID-related expenses, and we ought to dedicate that money to that. And if we can use that money for those extra unemployment benefits, then we have that trust fund set aside so that we may need it for other things coming forward.
Brad, how hard is that going to do to somebody who's been unemployed for 26 weeks to explain, well, now we've got $3.8 billion over here in a trust fund, but we're not willing to spend it?
Well, that's a real big problem for both the politicians and the people who may benefit from it. But Tom, I think the perspective that you paint is very, very poignant. That's the big question marks that's going to remain. The big concern I have is that with such a high unemployment rate right now and a lowering of the amount of money that they're receiving, it is definitely going to impact rent. It's going to impact utilities, and it's going to impact consumer spending.
It's going to impact the economy. John, Cooper, in his budget proposals, once again got on the horse advocating Medicaid expansion. Any likelihood that anything like that is going to happen in this session?
That's an issue for the voters to sort out in the election.
Is that a run-on issue?
Governor Cooper knows that. The Republicans know that. It's not going to happen in the current mix. It might happen if there's substantial changes in the legislative makeup in 2021.
A lot of interest in trying to expand broadband internet to parts of North Carolina that don't have it. There was a legislative proposal last week or so that proposed $15 million for expansion of internet. Governor Cooper says he wants $50 million. Chris, how's the legislature going to sort that out?
I don't know, but I can't think of a bigger priority. We mentioned earlier what should happen this session. I think we are in obviously uncharted waters in many cases, and the priority, a lot of kids don't have a choice. They have to stay home. It's not safe, and they don't have internet connectivity. And we've known that for a long time. That is it's a crucial we've said this before. We need to start thinking about internet the same way we think about water and electricity. You just simply can't function, and you especially can't do it now. So I think we need to spend whatever we need to get as many people in North Carolina access in their homes as we can.
Becki, one of the interesting things about Cooper's proposal was he recommended cutting the opportunity scholarships. Now, this has been a pet for the legislature and school choice for some time to come. Is this going to be just dismissed out of hand?
Well, Tom, it hasn't just been a pet of the General Assembly. This has been a program that has literally changed lives across North Carolina to offer low-income families the opportunity to attend a private school if that better fits their needs. And we have story after story after story of the difference that this has made in people's lives. And I think as we look at the importance of education and how we're going to deliver that and how we're going to ensure, if we've learned one thing through this pandemic, it's that kids learn differently. And we ought to make as many opportunities available to allow them to excel wherever they can. And the thought that the governor would go in and try to take money away from a program like this, I think is just shameful.
Just to be clear, though, this program increases access for straight kids or kids with straight parents. The vast majority of schools do not allow gay or lesbian students or students with gay or lesbian parents to even enroll. So let's be clear about what this is not for all poor children in North Carolina.
Chris,
well, the vouchers go to the families, Chris. They don't go to the schools. So the
That's right, but
families
the
get
vast
to
majority of the
choose what
schools
schools
that
they
receive
want to
the
go
vast
to.
majority of the schools that receive the vouchers do not allow gay kids to enroll or kids with gay parents. That's simply a fact, Becki. It's 3/4 of the schools refuse admittance, so they're cut off from using the money that they get. Why do we have to discriminate if we truly want parental choice?
Brad, let's switch over to bonds. That might be a safer subject here. The governor wants to propose $4.3 billion for bonds. They're going to be for schools, they're going to be for higher education, water and sewer infrastructure, affordable housing, but he doesn't want to vote on them until 2021. What's up with that?
Well, he can't get on the ballot in November for sure, so it'd have to be a 2021 election. But I agree with the governor 100%. If you really want to pump money into the economy, use general obligation bonds and infrastructure spending on affordable housing options, on public schools, on transit options, infrastructure development with broadband, high-speed internet. So the governor's definitely hunting in the right direction on the bond referendum, Tom.
Becki, this is a yes or no question. A lot of people are saying that Cooper's budget is a run-on budget, something that he can take back to people, particularly his supporters, and say, here's what I'm trying to do for you. That mean old legislature won't cooperate. You agree or disagree?
I agree.
All right. Let's get to the part of the program where we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, let me start with you.
There's a wave of protests, as we all know, around the country and in North Carolina, sometimes devolving into riots and property destruction and violence. Notably, this time, mostly the Democratic leaders in these urban areas have been very much more aggressive and early, asking for assistance from the federal government, instituting curfews, trying to protect the public. That's because they're reading the same polls that the Trump campaign and the Republicans are reading, and they know what the public thinks about these protest movements during a pandemic devolving into riots.
What do you think of Mary Ann Baldwin, mayor of Raleigh, issuing a curfew? We hadn't even had any protest demonstrations, and she's issued a curfew already.
Actually, I think she should have permitted the protest that was planned in Raleigh for some time other than dusk, because that creates potential for difficulty and violence.
Got a minute and a half left. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I thought we all had a consensus that it's a good idea that everybody fill out the census and that we count everybody in North Carolina. We have a lot of people in North Carolina around the country that have not been counted. The Trump administration has cut by a month the time the census has to count it. I'm wondering where all the conservatives are who wanted people to sign up, not objecting to the Trump event.
Only got a 60% participation. Brad, tell me something we don't know.
Two big stories to follow, Tom. The daycare crisis as a result of COVID-19 and the fact that the universities are going to lose money sending students back home. Will there be faculty cuts?
Interesting. I don't think there's any question about the fact that we're going to see furloughs and cuts throughout the university system and probably state government. Becki, give us something we don't know.
Tom, North Carolina is the only state in the country that has closed down gyms, that continues to prohibit gyms being allowed to open. If we're going to get the economy back going, we've got to open these businesses safely.
Right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. While there, subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. And until next week, when we talk about the Labor Day edition on elections, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.